right, as we are moving on, wasn't that a great discussion from James Lee and the ITRC board, if I do say so myself? I'm so proud of them. This, oh, thank you, a round of applause. This next panel is part of our Identity, Inclusion, and the Individual series, and this has been a reoccurring theme at this event for the past several years. You know, the way that people use, maintain, protect, and recover their identity, it differs and varies among different individuals for a variety of reasons, and these can include cultural and accessibility reasons. We have to deepen our understanding in this area if we're going to build culturally competent and trauma-informed services and the policies that support those services. So with help from Synchrony Bank, Wells Fargo, and Norton LifeLock, the ITRC embarked on a 3-year project to begin this important work. And we've partnered with the Black Researchers Collective and recently released our preliminary findings. I am honored to introduce Glenence Green, the co-founder and executive director of the Black Researchers Collective. Ms. Green is a researcher, writer, community organizer, and filmmaker. Seriously, Glenence, is there anything you don't do? She makes me feel like an underachiever. She holds a BA and an MA in sociology from Loyola University Chicago and DePaul University respectively. And at the end of her presentation, we will have about 5 minutes for Q&A. I'll come back up in case there are questions for me as well. And with that, Glenence, take it away.
Thank you, Eva. All right, let's see. Let's get this in full presentation mode. Good morning, everybody. Oh, that was dry. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I love that. As Eva said, my name is Glenence Green. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Black Researchers Collective. For those of you who don't know who we are, which I assume is probably everybody in the room because we're just getting out and it's pandemic, so we're outside now. The mission of our organization is to train and equip communities with research tools so that they could be more civically engaged and policy informed. We are rooted on the south side of Chicago. I don't know if we have any other Chicagoans in the building. Woo, woo! Yes, the one man right there. So shout out to you. We partner. This is a very special relationship. We partnered with ITRC last July to really conduct a study to better understand identity crimes in Black communities, particularly understanding how identity crimes and compromises occur and the impact that they have on individuals. Today, we'll be discussing some of those preliminary findings of the first phase of a 2-phase study. Findings from both phases will be used by the RTC to develop culturally appropriate victim support services. Phase 1 of the study, executed this past fall, was a survey that sought to understand how identities as articulated by the ITRC in Black communities are used, maintained, and protected, and how these identities are recovered and or remediated when compromised. Phase 2, which will be underway later this spring, will include a series of focus groups with victims across the nation to really get a comprehensive understanding of the impact through the lens of their lived experiences. So during this presentation, I will be putting these findings in conversation with one of ITRC's most recent surveys and publications, which is the 2022 Consumer Impact Report, because they are measuring some similar things with a similar sample size to contextualize them accordingly. That report included a survey of about 120 victims between April 2021 and May 2022, and Black victims in that report represented 11% of the sample. So, in terms of our sampling, I always think that's something that's important to start off so people kind of know, this is a short window of time, and, know that this wasn't thousands of people that we looked at, but it can still give us insights on how to move forward and how to be able to develop programs that support victims accordingly. So the survey administration window was open for data collection over a period of 5 weeks from October to November 2022, leveraging our cultural experiences as Black women. We are a Black women-led collective. We know that our communities are more likely to respond to trusted sources or people that we know. So we employ both a convenient and snowball sampling approach for our outreach. Initially, we had about 477 people attempt to take the survey, many of whom were screened out because they did not self-identify as Black or African American. Which led us to which really indicated that the contact data that we had from our convenient sampling approach was overwhelmingly non-Black. Nevertheless, during the survey administration period, we collected about 167 responses from participants who identified as Black or African American. So let's take a look at some of those study demographics and preliminary findings. At least 19% of Black survey respondents also shared an Indigenous identity. This is important to include. We felt this was important to include because Indigenous identities, as many of you may know, are often marginalized and perceived as invisible or non-existent. So we felt that it was necessary to show that Indigenous folks are also being impacted here, represented through a Black and Indigenous identity. Most of the survey responses were under the age, which about 82% were under the age of 55. This is really reflecting a significantly younger sample of people compared to the impact report, the ITRC Consumer Impact Report, where 43% of that sample were under the age of 55. The sample was pretty balanced with regard to gender, with 51% identifying as women and about 45% identifying as men and 4% non-binary or gender non-conforming or simply preferred not to answer. There was some geographic representation from pretty much all of the regions in the country, with the Northeast being slightly higher represented than other regions. This was a fairly educated sample with over half of the survey responses, 51% being college educated. This includes 2-year degrees, which was a 5% increase from the consumer impact victims from the report, the ITRC report that had 46% of folks reporting with college degrees. So this will be really interesting when we get into some of the findings, but the majority of the sample, about 75%, made under $75,000, which was on par and similar to the consumer impact report, but their majority was 68%. So I'm going to stay here for a moment to say the majority of the survey responses, in terms of the findings of this, 67% reported that them or someone in their household had been a victim of identity theft. 45% of those respondents were victimized within the last 2 years during the pandemic. In general, 70% of identity theft victims from our study, from our survey, lost between $104,000 and $999, which may not seem like such a big deal. However, this percentage is much larger than ITRC's victim loss, under 5,000 in previous years. It's about the same as the combined rate of ITRC's victim loss for both 2021 and 2022, where there was a 51% and 20% loss respectively. This is quite the impact, given that 75% of the sample made under $75,000 and 54% of this same sample made under $50,000. More than half of the impacted respondents, about 51%, spent less than a month resolving their identity theft issues. However, the majority of victims, about 64%, with identity theft protection, spent about a day or less resolving, compared to only 36% of victims without ID protection. When Black victims did experience identity theft, the majority indicated that They reported the incident to family and friends. That was about 72%. A bank account or another credit card company or payment provider, that was about 63%, or a law enforcement agency, such as the police, at about 53%. Black victims were less likely to report the incident to the Better Business Bureau, to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Internal Revenue Service. They were least likely to report to those institutions. Many survey respondents first discovered that they were a victim of identity theft when they received a notice. Either when their credit card alerted them, that was about 42%, or when they received a notice that their social media or email accounts had been hacked, that was about 39%. About a third of the victims were notified by their bank, but 24% of the victims first learned that their identity was stolen when they checked their credit score. Most of survey participants, that's 80%, reported having their identity stolen by someone that they know. So there's so much I don't want to just overwhelm you all with data on data on data, but I wanted to just paint a picture here in terms of the context in which we're looking at this and the very unique impacts that some of these things might have on Black victims. And since we don't have a whole lot of time, oh, great. Did a great job on timing here, Eva. I do, you didn't have to give me my 5-minute warning. I would like us to move quickly into Q&A because I want us to have much more of a conversation with one another. And I want to invite Eva back to the stage for us to be able to have a conversation with you about some of the questions that you might have. And how this is interesting in the context of your work. Thank you. Hello. I will say, we have a final report. Those are just some of the preliminary findings. So we didn't want to give you just a teaser, but the report will be coming out next. It won't be coming out. We'll be submitting it to ITRC next week, and so there's more to come. And they'll be able to share their dissemination strategy. But we're very much looking forward to what's next to come.
Well, and I'd love to take questions from the audience. And while you are formulating those questions and reaching for the microphone, I do see a question over there. I just want to level set that, we have been looking at different populations of victims. And look, victims are all different. They're coming at this issue from a very different place. And we can't say they're this one homogenous group. But we can look at where that common thread is, some of the similarities. Maybe it's based on age. Sometimes it's going to be based on the region of the country where you live, and sometimes it is going to be based on race and ethnicity. Where can we pull out some of that information so that we can build better programs that are going to help these folks really meet them where they're at and help them to assimilate the information in a way that's meaningful? So that's the intent behind these types of programs. This is a pilot program. It's the first one we've done. I hope to do a lot more of these for more communities. And with that, I did see a hand back there. Yes.
Hi, am I on? Okay. Hi, thank you for sharing this data with us. I was just curious how identity theft was defined for the respondents that were completing the survey.
Well, I can let you answer the survey particulars.
Good question, because that was one of the questions that we had early on, or how do we ensure that victims are understanding identity theft as you're understanding it? So the way we did it is we put the definition, ITRC's definition, on the survey, and then asked the question, have they been a victim based on this particular definition?
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Oh, do you not have a microphone at that table? Oh, thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. I think the data we've had all throughout the morning has made it clear the scale of the problem. And by digging into this particular community, it's showing, there's a disparate impact. Can you bring it to life in real stories? What you're seeing in terms of the friction in people's lives, the loss in productivity, the pain and the stress of going through all of this. I know that wasn't maybe the core objective, but did you get any of that anecdotal evidence to bring this to life and how it's really, really impacting everyone's day-to-day lives, and then the aggregate impact of that, both on the community and the country more widely?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
I will just say this, a lot of what you're talking about is going to be a part of the second part of this research, because we're going to be doing qualitative research as the second phase. So more of those stories and a better understanding of the real life impact, what it actually means for this population, that's stay tuned to be continued. But I mean, even when we look at the data from the quantitative survey results, we are getting some stories. And I know, Glennis, you are more intimately acquainted with that data. You've been looking at it probably till your eyes are crossed. So I'll let you share anything that you teased out from those responses.
Yeah, I think part of it is, and I don't want to share too much that hasn't been public yet or been released to ITRC. But she's right. That is phase 2 of the work, right? Part of phase 1, and you get a limited amount of information from surveys because it's a tool that is intended to measure certain things. Some people out here are really using surveys incorrectly. So they can capture some anecdotes, but it's really that qualitative, those qualitative approaches that are meant to really capture the lived experiences much more deeply. So, part of this relationship was RTRC saying, we think that this could potentially be a thing. Is this a thing? The first phase was really like determining whether it's a thing and how it's a thing, right? And then now, what are the things that we need to investigate and investigate and examine and unpack to be able to tell the deeper story much more intentionally. Yeah.
Well, and that was a really big part of the whole start for this research was we think this may be true, but I don't know.
Right.
We need to take a look at this and see where it takes us. So we did not go into this with any real preconceived notions. I think the only notion that I had was, I do think that there is going to be a common thread in different communities. And if we can pull that out and figure out what that is, I think that will be meaningful in the developing programs and frankly policies that will help to better address the needs of victims. But I don't know what that thread is, and we didn't go into it with that in mind. But soon we'll know. Very soon we'll have more of that information, and I'm really excited to find out what it is. And I see you guys nodding, so you guys are excited too. Good. I'll put you on the email distribution list so you can all get the report.
I think one of the things that did come up, right, is in our conversations, Eva and James, is how when Black folks are impacted by or victims of identity theft, what they are doing about it and how they're going about doing that thing, right? So the finding about we go tell our friends and our family first, right? We're not the first point of, and I say yes, the other Black person in the room is also shaking their head. So yes, we go tell our people first and we're resolving with our people. It's not necessarily, we're not thinking to go to an institution first to resolve. And so when we really think
that was very interesting.
Yeah,
the first point of contact. So different groups of people go, oh, I'm going to tell someone in law enforcement or in authority to help me resolve this issue. That was not the case with our respondents. They were like, no, I talked to my community, my friends, my family, my faith-based community members, but they certainly were not going to institutions. That was not the first call. I mean, maybe grudgingly after they were told, well, this group can help, this institution can help, contact them, but not the first thought in their head. I'm going to seek that authority figure for help, for understandable reasons, but that really was an interesting data point when you found that.
But even then, sometimes it's not even the second or third point, because remember, the other finding is that most of the most of the people were impacted by somebody that they knew, right? So we're less likely to go and report, somebody who we know, friend or family, to the IRS or to a government entity. And so that's also something that's important to understand. So when we're thinking about how to develop like culturally appropriate victim services, you do have to think about how we culturally respond to things. We're probably not going to serve our brother up on a platter, for somebody, because it's going to impact the whole entire family as well,
Right.
So that's something that's important to think about, how we access and can still get support to victims given the circumstances.
Given the family identity theft piece, having a known perpetrator, that's a challenge for any victim. And I've talked to many of them who have wrestled with, how do if I have to take responsibility and absorb the liability, then I can't report my mom, let's say. I can't report my mom, but then again, I can't pay these things back. So they're really put in a very challenging position, knowing that the only way that those consumer protections can kick in is if they make that police report or file that FTC affidavit, then they no longer have that responsibility. But they love mom or dad or their brother or their sister, don't want to see them get in trouble. It is a real challenge for victims when it's a family member or a close family friend.
Other questions?
How are we doing on
Yeah,
time,
how are we doing on time
folks?
with the
Oh, we got a few more minutes.
Yeah, great.
So my question is really regarding your conversation about what do we do about follow-up, particularly on a younger generation that has identity theft, following up on training, what are these codes that they're being sent and, not to share them. Sometimes we go to mentoring groups and we make sure that younger generation knows not to give out their code if somebody's logging in, like, follow up and training to keep, so people are in the know that, they don't live and breathe this like us every day. So I'm really interested on, following up and training for the younger generation, and I'm sure that's built in somewhere as you're speaking about now, but, just like to know your thoughts around it in your program as well, how you're handling that.
Well, this particular research program is very defined. And so that follow-up that you're talking about is not necessarily a part of this pilot program. But my hope is, because this is what the ITRC exists to do, not only do we provide free recovery services to victims, we do community education and outreach all across the country. And I mean, look at me, you guys. I will take any microphone that is handed to me. Let everybody know I'm happy to go out. Our outreach coordinators are happy to go out into any community and provide this education. I am hopeful that this project does help us to build more relationships in some communities that have historically been hard for us to reach, and that we build some trust so that when this is completed, after the qualitative, I always have to really think when I'm saying quantitative and qualitative, which one I'm talking about. When we are finished with that process, that we have built some trust so that we're able to go back and say, hey, would you like us to do some community presentations? And we're happy to put it on video or have a speaker come to your church or to your community center. So the education that we provide, it exists now. We are doing presentations, hundreds and hundreds of them, across the country every year. Hopefully, through this activity, we'll help build some other relationships with some of these groups so that we can do even more of that. But it is on the table. It is a part of the ITRC mission, and we're going to continue to provide that and hope to grow it.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So just had a quick question from the data that you presented where you talked about the loss statistic. And I think you made a comment that the total was higher. It was almost like combined the 2 years from the ITRC, but this community had a higher level of loss. I just was curious, are we defining loss as actual out-of-pocket loss like the victim wasn't able to get restitution from a bank or credit card or something like that? Or is it like the initial loss and then it got paid back? I'm just curious, but for both the ITRC data as well as this data, when loss, is that actual loss or
For the consumer aftermath report, it's actual loss.
it is actual
Because
loss?
we ask a separate question about what was the value of, if there were charges or things like that, what was the value of those items? But what was your actual financial loss?
Uh-huh.
And then I believe we followed the same methodology for this. So these are dollars that are actually not being reimbursed. These people are not being made financially whole. And
Okay.
I know sometimes there can be a disconnect because we tend to think, well, so much of this is simple identity theft where it's an existing account and those consumer protection laws are in place. They can get, do a chargeback, they can get reimbursed. And to be sure, that's a lot of these cases, but it's nowhere near all of them.
Yeah,
So-
so it sounds like it makes sense if the victim is not going to an institution and saying, hey, I had this happen, you know, can I place a claim? That they're not going to have as much restitution, right? They're not going to get covered by financial institutions' policy of, hey, if you have verifiable fraud, we're going to pay for that.
Well, we'll see. I mean, as we dig deeper, we'll see how much of it. I'm sure that is one of the reasons
Mhm.
or a partial reason, but so much of these identity crimes and this fraud is occurring, it's not necessarily unauthorized charges where they would be able to file a claim and say, I need to be reimbursed. Some of these are authorized charges, but they're scams. And so these individuals don't know that they think they're talking to their bank. They think they're talking
Yeah,
to the
like a
IRS.
romance scammer.
So a romance scam. So who do they then report that to? Because they may try to report it to their bank. They may try to contact their credit card company, but that was an authorized charge.
Right.
Maybe that it happened through a social media account and social media direct messaging or dating websites. Who are they going to report it to?
Yeah.
There's no one that is obligated to make them financially whole. And frankly, there's no one for them to even.
Sure. Well, and I
Well, they come to us.
Yeah, I
They
can
report
see
it to
that.
us.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I guess it goes to the original question, Megan, that you had about how do you define identity theft? Because in a case of somebody who, actually did an authorized transaction, it's not technically identity theft. You're not stealing somebody's identity to do that. You're scamming somebody and making them make a purchase they weren't, or, sending money they weren't, they were thinking you were somebody else, right? So it's a little bit,
It's very broad. For purposes of the ITRC mission, we deal with identity crimes.
right.
And that
identity crimes,
includes
Yeah,
identity theft, identity fraud in the very traditional sense.
Yep.
But it also, it scams, imposter scams,
Yep.
anything where there is an identity credential or identity is related to the commission
Yep.
of the event and the activity, we will get involved with that. But you're right, it's some of these occurrences are not the very traditional legal definition of identity fraud.
yeah. So the solutions will be, wide range.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And for this study, thank you for your question. For this study and, for this phase of the study and phase 2 of the study, all of the ways in which we're articulating and, these definitions are all in alignment with how ITRC has already presented them to the community. And so I do just want to, that is in alignment because we want to make sure that we're measuring similar things in similar ways. I do want to just unpack that finding about loss. So according to the 2021 Consumer ITRC's 2021 impact report, there was 51% of victims lost under $5,000. That dropped down to 27% in 2022. So I said it's about the same. It's not more, it's 70%, but 70% to 2 years. We're talking about 2 years. That's like 78%. It's kind of that's disproportionately high for this particular group of people.
And it looks like we could sit here all day and answer questions, but we have to wrap it up
Oh,
because we have to get to the next panel.
fireside chat.
And I did this by design. I am going to welcome up my other panelists. Jason Cradaville is our moderator. Oh, there you are. I was like looking for you out here. You're like Mr. Deeds. You're very, very sneaky. And Jessica Roy. Jason will introduce us, but I don't even have to move from the chair. I can just have Jessica come sit here for the fireside chat.
Well, before you do that, I'm going to make my formal exit. Thank you all, everybody.
Thank you, Glennon.